All right, it is 10:55, so let's begin. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. All right, this is on then. Hello and welcome to the SIG testing intro. My name is Sean Chase. This is Erick Fejta. I am a SIG testing newbie and he is one of our SIG testing chairs. And we both work at Google. And I'm gonna tell y'all about SIG testing. So this is Kubernetes. Kubernetes has over 1,000 active contributors, over 35,000 contributors to date, and 69 very nice repositories that are constantly pushing code. There's a lot of code, it changes all the time, and it would be really nice if Kubernetes worked, and if we had tests, so that way we can keep the Kubernetes jungle juice flowing. So SIG testing's ultimate goal is to keep the current release of Kubernetes functioning and make sure that it gets tested and that we have all of the infrastructure and the support we need to do it. We do this by maintaining a lot of different tools. Here's an overview of everything we do. I'm going to go into one of them, Prow, a little bit, and then near the end, Eric is going to tell you about all of the rest, because there's a lot to go over. Prow is the CI/CD system that runs on Kubernetes that the Kubernetes community also uses. It's complicated. It's got a lot of pieces, and a lot of the pieces do a lot of different things. And if you're new, like I was, it can be a little intimidating to figure out what this means. I'm not gonna go over this. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you instead what it was like the first time I submitted a PR to the Kubernetes community. So I started out, I pulled up a good first issue. I copied a bunch of stuff from Stack Overflow, I did some coding. And then I got it to test and was pretty happy with it, and I submitted a PR on GitHub. After I did that, two things happened at once. One was that a very nice robot came by and told me what I did wrong. The second was that some very nice people came by and told me how I could do better. And that is functionally the process. All of the tests that the robot did are called pre-submits. We'll get to that in a minute. But I go back, I change my PR. This goes back and forth for a little bit until eventually I make some human happy and they say, all right, this change is good to go. Once they say the change is good to go, the robot runs a bunch more other code that we'll get into. We'll call those post-submits. And then my code is part of Kubernetes forever. No takebacks. Let me go into what happened there a little bit. When I submitted a PR, some stuff called pre-submits ran. And after I actually got the PR through, some other stuff that we'll call post-submits ran. These are Prow jobs. And this is the one thing that I wish that I had explained to me when I started really playing with Prow. Prow jobs are a custom resource definition. But they basically just say, when X happens, do Y. No matter how complex or wacky your Prow jobs get, they're all some variation of when X, do Y. X has kind of three forms. Pre-submits are when somebody wants to put the code in. Post-submits are after somebody's put the code in. And periodics happen every X arbitrary units of time, or every Tuesday at 1 a.m. or whatever. And Y is any image. If you can put it in an image and pass it some commands, then Prow can run it as a Prow job, which makes it incredibly flexible and a little hard to understand sometimes. But this is what a Prow job does. Prow jobs also have some things packaged with them most of the time. These things are called pod utilities. When you run an image, it has a number of containers that kind of go on the side with it, that run with it, that do useful things. They mostly do two very useful things. One is that they pull your code from GitHub, so you don't have to write git clone every time. And the second is that it exports the logs to external tools like Testgrid and Grafana, so that way when the tests fail, we can see that the tests failed. These kind of go with it because we want prow jobs to generally do these things. And they are activated with a single YAML line, decorate equals true, right there. That adds 4 pods and does all of these very nice things for you. And it's very convenient once you know what's happening. So I've talked about X, the trigger, and Y, the payload, a little bit. But I kind of glossed over exactly what do means. What prow, specifically a component of prow called plank, is doing is that it takes your image, it bundles it up with a bunch of very nice, neat stuff, and then it launches it off to some Kubernetes cluster. And then your prow job runs, and then it dies. And when it runs either a pre-submit test, or it deploys some code, or whatever that arbitrary image is. Build clusters can be other Kubernetes instances, or the same one that prow is on. When they're different, they're sometimes called build clusters, and when they're the same, the one that prow is on is called a build cluster. If you're running a stripped down version of prow, sometimes it just launches them to another namespace on itself. But the details probably don't matter that much. It bundles it up, throws it off, prow job runs, prow job dies, emits some logs, everyone's happy. There is, part of going through this is to brag a little bit about some of the new stuff that SIG testing has done. And this is, I think, my first opportunity to really brag about something new and exciting. And it's called PJ Unkind. PJ Unkind does that process that I just described, only instead of building an entire prow to test your prow job, you run a script. So instead of a ship, you're a little man with a cannon. And it creates a kind cluster to actually run your prow job in. So it's still launching it to a Kubernetes cluster somewhere. That somewhere just happens to be in an image on your local machine. And this is great for testing prow jobs. So if you're playing around and you want to run a test on your code, and you're writing one of these, and you forget the indentation, which is something that I did, you can run PJ Unkind and figure out that your mount isn't mounting. And it's really neat. So pre-submits are generally used for running code and making sure nobody puts in anything really crazy. If you put in Go code that doesn't compile, some pre-submit should run and say, this doesn't actually make sense. Please don't merge it. Post-submits are a bit more powerful because with a post-submit, after you change code, say a configuration file, you could then change the state of the world. You could have it run a kubectl apply f, where your code is some document that describes a Kubernetes thing, and then whenever you change that code, prow goes and changes the state of the world. The way that the Kubernetes community manages this is through ownership and the concept of owner's files. Throughout not only test infra, but any of the Kubernetes repositories, you will see owner's files, and we use these basically to determine who needs to say yes to your PR to let it merge. Remember earlier when I actually made a human happy and then my code started to merge? This is how we kind of control that. And the processes for exactly who gets to be an owner and approver are documented, and the people at contributor experience are always thinking about the best ways to do that. But technically speaking, that's what this list does. And in this way, we can use prow and the code on GitHub to control infrastructure. And this is, I don't even know over that. And this is very neat because that's actually how, my second chance to brag, this is how prow updates itself. So right now, we're constantly making changes to code, and that includes prow itself. And we can use prow to deploy things, which includes prow itself. So if you want to see this in action, you can actually see that in our prow instance that the Kubernetes community uses, which is the Kubernetes test infra GitHub, go there, it's great. You can see that there is a periodic job that looks for a new version and creates a PR. A robot wrote this, and that PR updates some cluster file from the old version to the new version. And then a human approves it, and then the cluster file changes, and then a post submit launches to actually update prow itself. And this concept can kind of be extended much further. So if you want to use prow yourself as a CI/CD solution, you can write prow jobs to do actually anything you want, because it takes an arbitrary image. And I will hand it off to you now, because I think I've talked enough about prow.
All right, great. Thank you, Sean. And yeah, so we talked a little bit about prow, and this is one of the important things that SIG testing is involved with. And I think that, hopefully maybe this is getting you excited about SIG testing, so I wanted to, or maybe there's other things that are interesting to you. If you want to learn more about prow, actually Steve and Alvaro are talking in a little bit in room 6 and 7. I think it's 7. So I would encourage you to go there to learn more about it. And so I'm going to talk about some of the other things that we work on. And I think one of the cool things about just the Kubernetes in general and SIG testing is no different, is that, we tend to be pretty friendly. And, so we have a bunch of people like Sean or others who, have fairly rapidly gone from being unfamiliar with Kubernetes, unfamiliar with SIG testing and prow, to being able to meaningfully contribute and have cool things that they can talk about and show off here. So I think that is cool, and maybe that can be one of you for the next KubeCon. So Testgrid is, I think, probably, you may not see it a whole lot until you are on the release team, and then you are looking at it religiously. There's the URL, testgrid.k8s.io. And here is the code, to the extent that it is open source, lives there. And it is the tool that we use to, after you have a big history of results, it sort of puts them into a visualized grid where you have runs on the columns and tests on rows, and then it has all sorts of exciting features to let you filter and sort and group. You can click and drag and sort of figure out like which commit might have caused the thing to go red. It's pretty cool. A new thing that Sean is actually pretty instrumental in writing recently is the transfigure tool that allows you to automatically manage if you have proud jobs in your org and you want to publish them on a regular basis to the Kubernetes test grid. There are various companies that publish their public results that you can use transfigure to automatically manage that. So using the same pattern as in the previous slide, it will, determine what your test grid should look like based on what your proud jobs are, and then automatically create a pull request to update the Kubernetes test grid with those results. And so we're in the process of open sourcing more of it. We're going to continue on that. We have ideas for automatic issue management to where, like, if something goes red, it'll open an issue, and when it goes back green, it'll automatically close it. And right now, it is largely a App Engine Python app, and we want to eventually turn it into a Go app that runs on Kubernetes. So Kind is super cool. There is a deep dive about that, as well as a workshop tomorrow. So the deep dive is today at 4:30 in room 5. And the workshop is tomorrow in room 29, although that might be, I don't know if the power situation will be what it'll be, but that might be here if the power situation is still moved like this one.
Yeah, these room numbers were accurate up yesterday, but some of the rooms changed.
So Kind is super cool because it allows, as he mentioned earlier, it allows you to schedule a whole pod or a whole cluster into a single container. There's the command, it's really easy to use. There's a lot of traction behind it. We want to add multi-node persistent volume support. Kubernetes is a large community, and so we sort of test the boundaries of what you can accomplish with Slack. And so we have some tooling to help us manage that. So something that's unusual, I feel like Slack is usually used for sort of more closed corporate communities. Kubernetes is an open public community, and that sort of comes with challenges around size, also abuse. And so we sort of have some tooling to help with that. And then also we really like this pattern of, to make things open, sort of declaring what channels we want to exist, which is the Templist tool that allows us to sort of, if you want to create a new channel, you merge a PR and then it'll get created. We want to, we're sort of working with adding more alerting, and we want to sort of make the UI of our extensions better. Boscos is how we do, is how we sort of do end-to-end testing. It allows you to rent resources, so it has a list of resources in state X, and it allows you to atomically move them to state Y, and then furthermore from Y to Z or Y back to X. So we use this, it's extensible, but we primarily use it to give tests a dynamic project that they can use exclusively for testing. And then we have a bunch of janitors which will clean up resources after the tests are over. So we want to, when this fails, it's really sad because all of our testing dies, and so we need better monitoring around that. Yes. Gopherage is a utility to sort of help you with code coverage, and so we try to do some end-to-end code coverage, and that Gopherage allows us to merge code coverage results across multiple runs, and it also allows it to change the formats in a way that Testgrid can then read it and graph it. And yes, so it is great, but there's very little docs about it, so we need more docs, and it'd be great to have more repos start using this tool. KubeTest is the interface that we have for end-to-end testing, so it sort of gives you a single command that can do a bunch of stuff like deploy the cluster, maybe do an upgrade, or run performance tests, or whatever other test you want, then tear it down at the end. And it's aware of like where it needs to download the Kubernetes version, or if it needs to build it, and whether it should be deploying to this or that cloud provider. And yeah, so it's pretty powerful, but it's also extremely complicated. There's sort of like, in order to run it, you have to send it a bajillion flags and a bajillion environment variables. So we've been sort of in the process of moving the environment variables to flags, and then we also generally just want to make it reduce the minimum number of flags you need to run. We have a bunch of extensive ways to manage the org declaratively, which has been working pretty well for us. So we have tools like Peribolus, which allow you to declare what members should exist in the org, and what teams should have what members, and what repos should exist, which we found has been working pretty well. It's sort of an easy way to sort of, it's cool to see that like, hey, there's a PR that is adding you as a member of the org, and then when it merges, you magically get your GitHub invite. Or if you want to manage your team, you can do it this way. We have similar things for labels, so that if you need a label on your repo or your org, you can use a PR to do that. And then also we make sure that if you have a required proud job, that we actually configure GitHub to require this proud job before it allows a merge. And so the repo work is new, and so we're not actually using that, I don't think, on Kubernetes yet, but that'll be very cool once we do. And then secret management right now, we would like to have a similar declarative solution. Right now it's kind of ad hoc, like message someone on call and have them add it, which is not super great. The PR dashboard, I love. It tracks PR attention. So if you have a ton of PRs that you need to review, or you have sent out a ton of PRs, GitHub doesn't provide a great way to see which ones I have actually replied to, and which ones are waiting for me to do something on. And so the Kubernetes PR dashboard does that. It'll sort of sorts your list about like, here are PRs that need your attention, and here are PRs that you need to, whatever, go bug someone. And yeah, so I think it's great. We want to also convert this to Go and Kubernetes from Python and App Engine. This was kind of an interesting experiment. We sort of created Prow and Kubernetes at the same time, and Prow has a bunch of excited people working on it now. Maybe it's just, I'm not sure why it is, but potentially one thing is that it's in Go, which the Kubernetes community seems to love, and not in Python, which has, whatever, it's stuff. And then there's the Testing Commons project, which is a tool to, or whatever, is trying to give people a consistent set of frameworks to do end-to-end testing. They have the Testing Commons channel on Slack, and then they have meetings, I think, every Monday. You can find more about it at, there. And yeah, so I guess that is it. We are friendly. We have stickers, so please come and take our stickers for Prow and Testgrid to remember, what these things actually are. Check us out on SIG testing on Slack. Come up and say hi. I think do you know what time this ends?
We have 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah. So we have plenty of time for questions. If anybody wants to, if anything here was you want to learn more about, we can blab about it now. We meet on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday. We have our Zoom meeting, and yeah. So yeah, let's do questions.
Yeah. You mentioned that KubeTest has a lot of flags. Have you looked at also making it available as a library?
So the question is, KubeTest has lots of flags. Have we looked at making it available as a library? And so what do you mean by a library? Like,
So in Knative, we like to be able to run everything with GoTest. Don't ask why, it just is. And it would be nice to be able to have provision cluster as something that you could, declare your GoTest and run a cluster without shelling out to something.
right. Yeah. Okay. So essentially, I guess the Knative community likes to do everything with GoTest, and it'd be nice to sort of import that library and do things like deploy the cluster and whatnot. That is a really good idea. I think, originally it was kind of just a way to. Kubernetes has lots of Bash, and so this was originally a way to not have it in Bash. And yeah, that's a really great point. And yeah, that is not something that we are actively doing, but maybe we should.
One other point on Bash, if you're using a Windows laptop, it makes everything really hard.
Right. Yes, it is true that Bash does work substantially less well for people on Windows. Any other questions or comments or feedback? Yeah.
More of a general question I can ask that if the others do as well, but is there efforts like bigger projects obviously are going to this infrastructure absolutely improving? Do you have sort of a concept as far about like having it built across other projects that have similar efforts that you can combine with sort of ideas, or is it pretty much just like we're solving Kubernetes problems primarily test building, or is there a way to say, hey, how can we do this in a more general way, but have Christian services work on one?
Do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, to, I guess, paraphrase your question, let me know if I'm perjuring you here. The question was about the scope of the work that we do. Does it apply to just Kubernetes? Does it apply to everyone? And have we reached out to others? I'm going to try and answer that with two parts. One is that within the Kubernetes community, we have a lot of outreach to other SIGs to help them get their testing working. There's a big push, I believe, by SIG architecture, or no, SIG conformance. Conformance tests are a big thing that we are working on, and we have been working closely with them to make that happen. And as for things that are not Kubernetes, a lot of these tools are not only open source, but regularly see use on things that are not Kubernetes. Prow, for example, has on its front page, in the GitHub repo, it has a list of all of these companies that we know of that are using Prow. There could be more because it's open source and you can just take it and we'd never know. But there's a lot. And so a lot of these tools do have testing use in general beyond just what Kubernetes uses and needs. They're kind of built for Kubernetes, but they're very extensible as a whole. And I think that goes for all of our tools. I can't think of an exception, but there's a lot of them. So if I'm wrong, send me a postcard or something. Anything else? Yes.
So I have a question about that as well. Today you just mentioned there is a decorative issue, so you will post the log to, I believe it's only GCS. So is there any plan to support like some other storage systems, maybe Swift, maybe something else?
Yeah, so the question is, decorating will export your logs to GCS. Is there, what plans are there for other destinations? And there have been some various, every now and again, someone, comes up with a proposal for that. And yeah, so I think it's, I think that's potentially a great way to contribute. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything, I don't think there's any opposition to that, but it's sort of, I guess open source works by what people are interested and willing to work on. So, so like a good example of that is GitHub Enterprise. Like most of the people, the core people working on the project don't really use GitHub Enterprise, so we never really developed, we didn't explicitly want Prow to not support GitHub Enterprise, but we didn't make sure it works for that. And so various people have been taking it and doing the necessary fixes to get it to work with GitHub Enterprise. And so, yeah, I suspect the same thing.
Given that it's not supported as of now, I guess I'm also not able to specify the name containers or not, because there's some validations that it cannot with name containers. So is there any specific reason to disallow that?
So that you can't create, so you're saying you can't use decoration because you can't create init containers? Why not? Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, I mean, the core design of decoration is that it will add init containers to your pod. So if that's how we essentially add an init container to check out the repo and an init container to upload some metadata to cloud storage. And yeah, if your cluster does not allow init containers, that obviously is not going to work and you'll have to manually do it. Oh, I see. So you have a init container. You want to write a Prow job that has an init container? Oh, right. Yeah. That's the same thing. It's kind of like no one has used it. None of the maintainers have needed to use that yet. That's a solvable problem, but it hasn't been solved yet. So another great way to contribute to Prow is to make support. We also right now are restricted to one non-init container as well, which is an arbitrary limitation that we could solve once someone needs more than one container.
We've had some mumblings about wanting more than one non-init container, but as it is with open source in general, there are a lot of great ideas and a lot of really wonderful ways to contribute. So please help us. PR is welcome. We're all very friendly. We're on Slack. And yeah, there's a bunch of things like that. I think so. Okay. 2 minutes.
2 minutes for more questions, or?
One last question, perhaps? Yes. So the question was, is this the platform and the tools that everyone in the Kubernetes uses across all of the Kubernetes org, or are there other tools out there? To my knowledge, I don't believe there are other tools beyond this. The Kubernetes org as a whole uses Prow and uses Testgrid and all of these other things. What does tend to diverge between organizations is that we don't really enforce what actually runs your tests. We say, here is an image, use that image to run your tests, here's how you use it for Go test, here's how you use it for other things. But I know that there are a lot of kind of testing engines floating around that people use depending on what their needs are. Yeah, sometimes there's a directory called hack. I know that Ginkgo is used, though I don't actually understand what that is. But there are a lot of different ways to run your tests depending on what kind of test you need. So that will vary from org to org and person to person. But by and large, to my knowledge, they're all being run by Prow. They all generally expose stuff on Testgrid and Grafana. They all could use Gopherage, though my understanding is a lot of people just don't. Does that answer your question?
So Minikube, I believe, is being built in Travis. I know Dashboard is still being built in Travis. Those aren't going to Brow. Sorry.
Okay.
And I know there is a couple other sub-projects in KSIG that are still being built in Travis, but they're
Okay. So there are a few that are currently running on Travis. I was wrong.
Yeah, I would say that the changes now Prow is available in all repos. But, you know, it's kind of, I mean, like one thing, it is what we would like people to use, but like right now there's not a great solution for if you want to do testing on Mac. Prow is designed for creating a pod, and you can't create a pod on a Mac, so that might be a really great, good reason to use a different CI system to run your tests. But yeah, we try, because you get all the other goodies like Testgrid and whatnot if you use Prow. And so we try to get people, but it's a large community, and so there's going to be lots of different ways that people do things, but we try to standardize on that. All right, and I think with that we are out of time, but we do have the stickers, and do not be shy. Please come up, and if you want an exciting Prow or an exciting Testgrid sticker, we will be happy to give them to you as long, yes, and we will not even need to, yeah. So thank you.